Yes. We will call the meeting to order. It is 6:30 p.m. on August 13th, 2020. This is a special meeting of the Board for Intermediate District 287. Good evening, everyone. My name is Regina Neville, the chair of the board. Just a few general notes. This meeting is being live streamed on District 287 YouTube channel. It is also being recorded. The link to the recording will be posted on the district's website in the school board section. The public is always invited to share their thoughts and comments with the board. Please complete the virtual meeting request form for written input that is available on the District 287 website, school board section. Written comments received by 4:30 p.m. on the day of the board meeting will be read at the beginning of the meeting. So a few reminders, just invite everyone to mute their mics. It appears that everyone has done so, but actually we do hear a little bit of feedback in the background. So if you check and your mic is not muted, I invite you to do so. I also ask that each of us identify ourselves when speaking. And if you wish to ask a question or share a comment, please use the raise hand feature on the board book Premier, and I will recognize everyone who would like to speak. At this time, I would invite board member Steve Adams to read the mission statement for District 287.
Thank you, Chair Neville. The mission of Intermediate District 287 is to be the premier provider of innovative specialized services to ensure that each member district can meet the unique learning needs of its students.
Thank you, Steve. At this time, we'll have board member introductions, and I'm going to ask Crystal Brackey to just call on each board member so that we can introduce ourselves and the districts we represent. So this is probably a good time for all board members to unmute their mics, and they'll be ready to go for the introduction. So Crystal, go ahead, please.
Adams.
Yes, Steve Adams from Hopkins School District 270.
And I am Crystal Brackey from Richfield Public Schools. Casey.
Ann Casey, representing St. Louis Park.
Keene.
Hi, everyone. Andrea Keene, representing Wayzata.
Ruthie.
Hello, everyone. This is Ruthie Dallas from Brooklyn Center Community Schools, number 286.
Michelle. Michelle, you're on mute.
Sorry. This is Michelle Kuntz representing Orono Schools. Yes.
Marty.
Hi, this is Heidi Marty representing West Tonka Schools.
Neville.
Good evening. I'm Regina Neville representing Edina Schools, number 273.
Sam.
Hello, my name is Sam Sant, representing Robbinsville 281 School District.
Seidel.
Adam Seidel, Eden Prairie Schools.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I would also like to recognize all of the staff who's joining us this evening. We have Tanya Allen, Michelle Axel, Ann Becker, Michelle Bratting, Amanda Cook, Juanine Mgini, Sean Garvey, Radius Guess, May Hawkins, Kim Helgeson, Rachel Hicks, Superintendent Sandy Lewandowski, Ben McGrath, Chad Maxa, and Dr. Jonathan Voss. Are there any staff members I have accidentally missed? Glad to have everyone here. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to walk through this evening's agenda, pointing out a couple of things as we go through. As I mentioned at the beginning of the evening, this is a special meeting for Intermediate District 287. We will have our formal consent agenda and then go immediately into our superintendent's report, where we will present the revised 2020-2021 District 287 organizational chart. And also we have a resolution scheduled for the 2021 learning plan. I invite the board members to refresh board book if they did not do so before just logging on this evening, or if you printed earlier, please note that there are a couple of additions in the agenda that were added this afternoon. One is regarding the learning model for this year. There is a new section 3. All other information remains the same. And there is also the steps to return to in-person school. The changes in this plan are a result of a feedback session. So please be aware of those additions to the agenda. And I'd also note that our plan is to discuss the learning plan, and there is a scheduled resolution vote. We will see what kind of information we gather. There is the opportunity to table if need be, but our plan at this point is to approve the agenda as printed. In addition to these items, we will have information with a policy update before we close for the evening. Are there any questions regarding the agenda?
I have one question. Having not known that there were additional things that were uploaded just before the meeting, are we going to have time to review them?
So thank you. It's a good question. My understanding is that these sections will be presented, and Superintendent Lewandowski, can you confirm that?
That's correct.
Thank you. So yes, thank you for the question. We will be walked through those additions during that presentation. Are there any additional questions or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, I move that we accept the agenda. Is there a second?
Second, Michelle Kuntz.
Thank you. Seconded by Michelle Coons. I invite all board members to unmute their mics. And Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Adams.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keen.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Coons.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel. We see you, Adam.
There we go. Yes. Sorry, it just wasn't clicking.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. The agenda is approved. Next up is audience opportunity to speak. Juanine, do we have anyone who wishes to address the board this evening?
No, we didn't get anything today.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll move on to approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone would like to have removed from the consent agenda for separate consideration? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as printed?
Madam Chair, there's no items for consent agenda.
We do not. Thank you. I'm working off of 2 documents, so you're absolutely right. I appreciate that. Thank you. We will move on to the superintendent's report. So I'm going to invite Superintendent Lewandowski to introduce this. I'd like to just make a brief comment that as we move into our, particularly the learning model, we'll talk about the organizational chart first, but with all of the discussion for back to school this year, I want to express my gratitude to Superintendent Lewandowski, the lead team at 287, and recognizing all of our educators and our families who have taken a great deal of time to share their input and to be a part of this process. We're grateful. We recognize the difficulty of the decision-making process, and we also recognize that we are looking at how things unfold in our home districts and respect that work as well. So I appreciate that gratitude. Invite us to hold each other with quite a bit of grace as we navigate our decision on the next steps for the district. So Superintendent Lewandowski, if you could please walk us through the organizational chart.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, board members. And I'll ask Juanine if she would share that screen, please, with the chart on it. You have it in your board packet as well. Probably the starting statement that I would make is that I really appreciate, and I know Tina's family did too, all your very kind remarks and offerings at last week with Tina's passing. And we are still obviously experiencing the grief and loss from that particular event. And I just really appreciate how everybody came together, and I know Tina's family did as well. As a result of that, however, we did make a couple of just very small changes on the chart that I wanted to call to your attention and ask for approval. We have asked, and Melissa Broding has agreed to assume the additional responsibilities of the Director of Special Education. And so you will see under that title that it is inclusive of the responsibilities she was doing before, and will pick up the additional special ed director responsibilities in addition to her principal role with the itinerant program. Just really want to thank Melissa. For several months, she has worked tirelessly behind the scenes to cover a multitude of different tasks. We certainly would not be where we are without her help, and I'm very grateful, and wanted to recognize that on the organizational chart for your approval. The other items primarily have names now of individuals you've met and approved, and they are in the right spot. And then finally, I just want to note that we are for the time being, not filling the Director of Mental Health and Partnerships. We just want to give that some more thought before we actually post it. It is listed on the chart as an open position, so it is approved by the board, but with Kate Hulse's resignation, that is open. And again, I want to acknowledge Kate Hulse's extensive contributions to District 287. It is a loss to have her not with us anymore. We wish her well and a healthy life, but most of all, just want to thank her for her amazing contributions over time. So we're going to give that some more thought, and may or may not post it yet this year as we gather some more clarity about that. But with those changes, I did want to ask the board, share with the board what they were, and ask the board for approval of this version of the organizational chart. Any questions?
Thank you, Sandy. Crystal Brackey, you have a question.
Yes, and it is not a question for this evening. I fully support and will be voting yes on this item. But I did just want to acknowledge that the Director of Special Education Student Support and leading the Itinerant Services Program is a significant workload. And so I'm wondering if that is something, now that all three of those items are with Melissa, who I know is on this call and hearing me say this, whether or not that's something that we are also going to be looking at for the long term. So Sandy, you can choose to address that now, or just sort of know that that's a question in my mind for the long term.
No, I'm happy to address it right now because it's a concern of mine. It's probably really a concern of Melissa's. We know that is too much for one person. We just want to take, and I should have mentioned this, thank you for bringing it up. I just want to mention that we want to take a little more time, examine that, and do the right thing, but also legally know we have to have a Director of Special Education, so we wanted to get that approved. But thank you. Yes, we will be looking at that as well as the Director of Mental Health and Partnerships.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments? So I would invite a motion to approve the organizational chart as presented.
Andrea Keen, I so move.
Thank you, Andrea.
Steve Adams, second.
Seconded by Steve Adams. Thank you. I would invite all board members to unmute their mics in preparation for the roll call vote. Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Adams.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keen.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Coons.
Aye.
Marty.
Yes.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the resolution for the 2020-2021 learning plan. Superintendent Lewandowski, I mentioned this earlier, but once again, want to express my gratitude to you, your team, and to all of our educators for their time in giving deep consideration to our proposal. And I would invite you to introduce this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just ask Juanine to put the first slide presentation up. I wanted to just make a few opening remarks to set the context, and then Ben McGrath will do an updated version of the learning plan that you saw at the last board meeting. And so as soon as Juanine gets that shared, we will start the presentation. I can say that this has been and I know your superintendents would agree, quite the experience. It is one of changing circumstances, and it's of immense importance to our communities to get this right, and that's what we want to do. So there have been changes along the way, and we'll try to highlight those for you tonight as we go. As I mentioned, this is the District 287 proposed learning plan for the 2021 school year. And we really like to emphasize this tagline internally and externally, that we're in this together, because that's truly what this experience has been. And our success really rides on all of us working together on this. So next slide, Juanine. There we go. One more in. Thank you. I noticed a phrase similar to this in one of the MDE or MDH presentations, and I added a little bit to it because I think it really explains some of the depth in as few words as possible. This planning was very, very technical. I am becoming more of a medical expert than I ever thought I would be, but it really requires an intense learning curve to absorb all the many parts of this, but especially the health-related data that is behind this particular effort. It's a very emotional plan. I think no matter which group we've talked to about the plan, reviewed it, got their feedback, there's emotion that comes with this, and that is very justified, but it varies from group to group, person to person. And this also has a moral underpinning, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the upcoming slides and upcoming presentations. Next slide, Juanine. So we tried to extensively survey our stakeholders. As you might imagine, we have a pretty broad reach here across the West Metro with 11 member district. We recognized as we tried to gain input that it was also a timing issue. The timelines and emerging plans are different for our member districts, and none of us have an exact timeline how this can all fall in place. So we tried to stay in sync and understand what was happening in each of our member districts so that we can incorporate that learning into our plan. And we'll share a chart with that in just a minute. In addition, the intermediate districts are somewhat different from each other. The closest intermediate district to ours is probably intermediate 916 on the northeast side. They're just about the same size as we are. They probably do not have quite as diverse a population, but they really serve similar populations of students. And yet theirs is similar to ours, but a little bit more open-ended than the plan you're going to hear from us tonight. Both 288 and 917 have versions of a hybrid plan that they are either considering or have approved at this point. And then you won't be surprised, transportation is a significant factor in this. We've had Amy Teedens and May working constantly with all your transportation directors, trying to coordinate their runs with our students, depending on which plan they're on and depending on which plan we are on. So you can imagine the complexity of that kind of planning, and we're really grateful that the transportation directors have been so involved along the way. Next slide, Juanine. This chart, please give us some feedback if we don't have it exactly right for your district, but it was an attempt to just do a high-level overview of what our member districts are doing. And yet it still has some changes that are happening, perhaps as recently as the same time we're having this, there's board meetings happening in some of our member districts. So this was the best summary of the information, and you can see there are some districts doing distance learning, some doing distance learning to start and then moving to hybrid. Some are doing incremental hybrids, and some are doing various kinds of structuring behind their hybrids. So it's been interesting to watch, and it's coming together. Many districts are now approved, but not every district. Next slide, Juanine, please. I want to talk just a little bit by way of background about the values that we kept in mind during this planning effort. They should not surprise you because the first two particularly are front and center in our strategic plan. We tried to think and understand the trauma-sensitive and healing practices that need to be present given our student population, which has a high degree of trauma. And they had that trauma when they left school in mid-March. And all the trauma experts that I've been able to read about from across the country and really across the world tell us that the trauma is likely to be significantly increased over the period of the last several months because of the pandemic, and also because of the social justice movement that has unfolded since Memorial Day. So it's really important for us to think about where our students are because of that trauma, and really think about what stage they're coming back to us from a mental health standpoint. And that is a significant value behind it because we want to be careful. When they do come back, we want it to be slow and successful so that we can not only start school, but keep school going. That is significant. And when you have as many setting 4 kids and area learning center kids coming back in one spot, we felt this was an important variable and value behind the plan. And we'll go into this, both I and Ben will go into this a little bit more, but racial equity is a significant value for us. And when I get into more detail, you'll see the differences based on race that are significant to understand and to consider in the plan. And it took us quite a while to gather all that information, but we think we have a good snapshot now, and that snapshot based on race inequities or equities needs to guide this plan. And then I'm not sure it's a value, but it certainly is an established expectation that we meet special ed compliance on all kids with students with an IEP. That gets tricky in this kind of particular decision-making and changing circumstance. And so that is an important part that is really front and center again during this planning, and especially as we move into whatever plan that we actually choose. Next slide, Juanine, please. So you might be thinking, what are the biggest factors that influenced the plan? I was struck by some of the Minnesota Department of Health and Hennepin County Health consultants that I talked to, that we need to not only consider the students and staff just within our particular school geographics, but because we have such an extensive draw of students and staff from all over Hennepin County, that we really need to understand the variations around the county based on zip code or city and how that changes. And that became a very significant fact for us, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Another big factor for us are the living situations that our students are often in. We have students that live in group homes, in care and treatment facilities. We have a very, unfortunately, a very large number of homeless highly mobile student. So we have congregate living, which again, health experts pointed out to me as a significant factor. And in addition, we have, this was an estimate by our local union, 2209, that as many as 40% of our staff have second and third jobs, and those jobs are often in congregate living care facilities. And again, the consultants are noting that those kind of congregate care often have higher transmission rates. And then finally, many students with disabilities, and that's obviously our core of student population, are unable to follow social distancing, masking protocols, and they are what I've come to use this term, a high touch population. When we think about the assistance they need, our staff often have to have touching involved with the student in order to guide them in the instructional process. And that also was a factor that was brought out to us by health officials, that high touch versus low touch populations are going to result in probably higher transmission rates. So those were the big factors that influenced our planning and the plan that you'll see tonight. Next slide, Juanine. So just by way of example of that difference in geographical area within Hennepin County, I'm going to show you two slides that basically are just an extension of each other, and they show the cities in Hennepin County with confirmed cases and death rates listed beside them. And in red, we've highlighted areas, cities that we actually have a facility in. That includes Brooklyn Park, that you can see there. That's where our Ann Bremer Education Center is. And take note of that confirmed case rate. That is of our sites, that's the most significant number and is really an important variable. That red line might have got moved. Actually, if you go to the next slide, Juanine, the Minnetonka one, that Hopkins one, was inadvertently outlined because our West Education Center is located in Minnetonka. So the rates in Minnetonka are shown there. We get a lot of open enrollment from the Minneapolis School District, so I highlighted that rate. New Hope is where our North Education Center is located. Plymouth is where our District Service Center is located, and we do have students coming in and out of there as well as staff. And then Richfield, where our South Education Center is located. So we were advised to keep that in mind in addition to the broader Hennepin County rates, especially those rates per 10,000 citizens. Next slide, Juanine. We also wanted to give you some racial demographics. As you can see, the very large number of BIPOC staff within District 287. It gives you a sense of the proportion of those different racial breakdowns, as well as our students and where they break down. And we do have obviously a very high number of students of color, and keep going back to that racial equity piece. So we want to keep that front and center to make sure that we are taking that into account as we both study and advise the board. Next slide, Juanine, please. And this just gives you a breakdown of your districts. These are all your kids. So taking the example of Brooklyn Center, the member district students of color are noted in the green or the teal, and the Brooklyn Center students they send to 287 are in orange. And you can see the differences pretty much all across the board. Is we have a higher number of member district students by district students that are BIPOC students that compared to their local district. So that's another important variable to keep in mind. Next slide, Juanine. And similarly, I mentioned the congregate living situations. These are just some breakdowns of the numbers that we see for our students who are in those kind of living situations where there may be a higher transmission risk. I would also say, just along with this, is the guidance we receive pretty consistently is the lower risk age-wise with our students is 10 and under, 10 and above, and we have students that are primarily in that 10 and above range, goes all the way up to age 21, and those students do have more potential for transmission. So age-wise, we are not balanced either. We do have more in that 10 to 21 group than we have in the 10 and under group. And then we have a very significant growth over the last few years in our homeless and highly mobile numbers. We have 160 students who are right now designated as homeless and highly mobile. So again, congregate living situations. Next slide, Juanine, please. After digging into the health consideration and specifically the transmission rates and listening to the group of area superintendents as well as the state and county health people, we know that our BIPOC communities are disproportionately impacted. And while I'm still trying to confirm the second bullet, I understood from a very good superintendent source that the case rate for communities of color in Hennepin County are twice as high as they are for our white citizens. So it's a significant difference than when you look at it racially. And the rates in Hennepin County today, the guideline that we're told to take into account each week are the number of cases per 10,000, and that goes to the chart that has the gradations of what kind of learning plan you should start from. And today that was just under 24 per 10,000 people. Last week's number for our Black citizens was approximately 50, and for our Latinx people were almost 57. So we have significant differences, and again, I can't say that too much. We're trying to take those things into consideration. Next slide, Juanine, please. As I mentioned, we did do some pretty exhaustive surveying, and Ben will get into that in a little bit. But I especially want to just comment on the most recent set of feedback from member districts, because you may have certainly had exchanges in your own district about feedback on the 287 plan. And the way we reached out to member districts is about 3 weeks ago, we sent out a survey to all the special ed directors, superintendents, business directors, and transportation directors. So that's a pretty wide, large group of leaders in our member district. And we got some limited survey information back. And at least one call from a superintendent for clarification and feedback. And then we believed that we had answered most of the questions at that point. But last Friday, we did get some more feedback from at least one of our member districts that gave us pause. And so from Friday to Monday, we scheduled a town hall kind of session for any leader in any of our member districts that wanted to hop on that town hall call and listen to our presentation and ask questions and express any concerns that they might have. So we did get significant comments back during that meeting. primarily through the lens of special education directors and special education compliance and legal issues. If I were going to characterize the main group of those comments, that was what it was. There was also interest in which day of the week we would have as a cleaning day to most align with member districts. And so these 4 areas are areas that we then took back and sent back a set of modifications to the plan to our member districts, and you received those as well this past week. And the first bullet that I wanted to call out is we made it clear, it wasn't clear enough, I don't think, in the earlier plan, that all of the learning models will be addressed in the IEPs for all students who receive special education services. And those students right now all have an individual learning plan that is on the books, if you will. That is the last plan all our students were on. And so no matter what plan we go into, we will go in and review those IEPs with families and staff, and try to make sure that we understand what families want and try to deliver what the team agrees is needed for all students with IEPs. Related to that, there was concern if parents disagreed with whatever model we were entering, and the general compliance route for that is a parent might file a complaint. They may make a comparison to the plan of the resident district, and ultimately it could be determined that compensatory education would be ordered. We don't know. There's no track record for that in these kind of pandemic times, so we really don't have a good way, nor are any of these things, has this been tested very well in the courts. So we really don't know. We have not received any direct feedback from parent. We have parent feedback that Ben will talk about in a little bit, but we have not had calls from parents since the plan was first introduced, telling us what they thought of the plan. So, but I did want to mention this because it was an important thing for our special education directors. We also moved back the start of when we were going to begin hybrid learning. Earlier, as you see, it was going to be in mid-October, and we modified the plan to bring step 1 back to September 28th. And as I mentioned before, the disinfecting day was important because of transportation considerations. So we switched our day from Wednesday to Friday to accommodate that transportation need. So those are some highlights of changes that we made just in the last week based on member district input. Next slide, Juanine, please. So I, just as Regina, I want to thank the planning team. I know our local 2209 staff has been involved since the beginning, including the president of local 2209, a number of staff members from all over the district as well. And we want to especially thank our nurses who have been key to the planning and will continue to be key to the implementation of whatever plan is approved. So I just want to especially thank those nurses. So I'm going to stop right there. And before I turn it over to Ben, I'll just pause. You'll have chances to ask questions now or later, but I just want to pause if there's any clarifications or questions you have right now before I turn it over to Ben. Yes, Ruthie. Oh. Regina, we can't hear you.
Hi.
Hi, Ruthie. Yeah, I think you can go ahead while Regina's trying to problem solve.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to, if you can go back on your slides, the first slide, I think where you identify what the district's plans were.
Yes.
We did make some changes in that. It's going to be a limited hybrid model, but it's geared more toward online learning as opposed to distant learning. at home. And so I don't know how you want to word that, but this is basically what we approved was the limited campus hybrid model. And it will start September 8th through at least Friday, October 9th. And most of the students under this model in E through 12, they would participate in full-time online learning off campus. And the students in the Setting 3 special education program would be the only student group to have the option of on-campus learning. All staff will report to the buildings for work and practice social distancing. They will wear masks and implement other health and safety protocols. And then the campus will be open for students to meet individually or in small groups with staff to receive on-site support. So more information about types of appointments and available service will be shared at a later date. So I think, it's a little different than what you had listed. And of course, you have, when they do come back to school, will have a few weeks for parents or any teachers or staff to give input for any changes to be made to the plan. But that's what it is at this point.
Thank you, Ruthie, for that clarification, and we'll note that for the future on the chart. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Sandy, this is Andrea. I have a question.
Yeah.
Since we lost Regina for a second. I don't have a really good understanding of compensatory education and how that works. I have the general idea, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it is, and then what is the process for determining if a child is eligible for that? And then if they are, is it just extra services or extra minutes? I know there's been a lot of talk about the compensatory education piece, and I just don't have a full understanding of that.
Sure. Thank you. I think Melissa is on the screen as well, and I'm going to invite Melissa to comment on that first. Melissa, are you with us? There she is.
Yes, I'm here. So compensatory education would be, it could be dollars, it could be additional services. It really is on a case-by-case basis, and we would want to follow it through, and of course do what we can to work with families before we go down that road to see what services we can put in place.
But it usually results from a disagreement between the parent and the school district. And it can go to a conciliation conference. It can go to various different kinds of resolution that are allowed within special education protocols and laws. And ultimately, if there's a determination that a district didn't adequately provide what was on the IEP, there could be a determination that extra dollars, extra services should be provided by the district that student. So it is a possibility, really, in any IEP situation. It really has been very limited in District 287. I would also say that I think the key point there that came up with our member districts was, what if a family felt that they perhaps were not getting the same number of in-person minutes than the resident district where that student came from? And there's a variety of different opinions about, how we compare resident district versus District 287. But what we ended up saying to our member districts is, no matter what the parent wants, we're going to go into that IEP meeting, we're going to discuss it, offer what we think is a response to what the parent wants, and then we'll figure out how to provide whatever it is that team ultimately agrees to.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. This is just my own check to see if I can be heard.
Woohoo!
Thank
Yes.
you. Okay.
Yes.
Don't know what that was, but I see that Steve Adams has a question. Steve, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Neville. Sandy, I've been getting some input from our special ed director and the parents of special ed students from our district.
Mhm.
And I was pleased to see that the start date for hybrid learning moved up to September 28th. What are the inhibitors from us doing it even sooner than that? We're looking right now at starting our hybrid learning earlier in September. And I'm just wondering, what are the barriers that are keeping 287 from doing the same thing?
Thank you, Steve. I think the primary thing is something I referenced earlier, is we want to ensure that we understand where the student is from a mental health and trauma standpoint. We also want to understand where they are from a learning standpoint, and we have tools that Ben will reference to assess that. Because we have such a large critical mass of students, what we want to be careful of is getting too many kids together too quickly without understanding really where they are at from a mental health and behavioral standpoint. We also want to be careful that we understand all the protocols that we're going to have to follow, especially given the population of students that have some of those characteristics where they can't wear masks, they can't or they can't keep it on just because of their disability. They may not understand or comply with social distancing, and all the other kind of high touch activities that often occur within many of our programs, and making sure we have a way to address that. So staff are coming back, how to handle that student who is not going to keep a mask on, or in the event that there might be a reason that there has to be a restraint. We want to understand how we're going to do that safely for our staff as well as our students. And again, that critical mass tells me, my experience tells me, go slow, figure it out, start well and as successfully as possible so that we can stay open. And that was guidance from the chief epidemiologist that I talked to, that was a prudent way. She emphasized, we want schools to stay open. We don't want schools to start and then have to close right away and then consider reopening. So it was a combination of factors that just led us to that really prudent, slower set of timelines. It's not dissimilar at all from Intermediate 916. And we think it's the best way and the most successful reintegration of kids back into the educational program. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're offering a better distance learning, a connected learning, if you will. You'll see that name on our chart. And we have several ways that we're changing that to give parents more additional kinds of in-person supports, even during distance learning. So that was a result of our best professional judgment.
All right. Is 916 following basically the same schedule we are?
Their plan that they've published is actually more open-ended on the front end than ours. We have that September date now. I believe, if I recall correctly, they don't have a date associated with it, but they are starting with distance learning.
Okay, thank you.
Ruthie Dallas, go ahead.
I have several questions. The first one is according to your data on the chart that you showed us, the districts that have the higher number of cases, are you allocating your staff resources accordingly to that, based on that, or what is your thinking on that?
Yeah, well, I think the way it will play out in reality, Ruthie, is that our staff are allocated based on students and the students' educational needs. Some kids have a higher educational need than others. Some kids might need 2 staff members per 1 kid. Other students may be able to operate in a group of 6. So the staffing numbers are more related to the number of students and the significance of their disabilities.
Okay, that makes sense. And then on the disinfectant day, since our district has chosen Wednesday as a disinfectant day, how does that align with your Friday disinfectant day?
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't talked directly with Brooklyn Center about that, but we didn't also get any concern about it that I recall off the top of my head from Brooklyn Center. We will still be doing distance learning on those off days, but more of our districts were taking the Friday day, and so we originally had Wednesday, and to accommodate most of the districts that had Friday, we changed it to a Friday to optimize the transportation routing in our region.
Okay, so you will be talking to our district about that.
Yeah, and I'm guessing our transportation coordinator maybe has already. She's been in contact with all the districts. I just don't know the details. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what my other question was, but
okay.
Just
Well,
let us know if it comes back.
Yeah.
Additional questions or comments before we do have some more presentation coming up, but at this
Okay,
point
great.
in time, does anybody else have a question or comment? Okay. So Sandy, I'll let you carry on then. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to invite Ben. Ben presented our plan at the last meeting, and he's going to present it with some additional information and modifications. And again, we're happy to answer any questions you might have. So Ben.
Thank you, Superintendent Lewandowski, Madam Chair Neville, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to be back here again tonight and share a little bit more information about our plan. The second document that you have in your board book is the document that I'll use to walk through the updates and our current plan. It's the really nice infographic that Rachel Hicks put together for us. I'm going to start with sharing my screen here. And what I'm going to do is just walk through this infographic relatively slowly and capture as much information and provide as much detail as I can. A lot of what you'll see on here, but also add some additional information as well as we go. I'd like to draw your attention to the 3 steps that you see on the screen in front of you. These look very familiar to the steps that we've presented to you in the past. There's 1 or 2 notable exceptions here. The first is that in step 1, that we've analyzed the grade band data, and in step 1, approximately 20% of our students is K through 5 students. So when we move to step 1, that would be K through 5 students and approximately 20% of our students across our district. In step 2, we're looking at still, and there's no change here, 50% of our students served for 2 days in person in this version of the hybrid model. And in step 3, 100% of our students served for 2 days in person in this form of our hybrid model. The way that we would phase in students through the steps to add more students to eventually reach 100 students would be, again, starting with K5. That mirrors the MDE recommendation for their phase in and the way that they've laid out the cases per 10,000 and students returning with younger students returning first. And then we would add in by grade level to reach the capacity that we've noted on the document as we move to step 2 and step 3. On the left-hand side of the screen in front of you, the connected learning. And this is where we've done a lot of work for the last couple of weeks to really make this something, as we mentioned last time that we were together, much better, much more rigorous, much more connected for our students and our families as we enter those first few weeks of school. And there's a couple points that I want to make. The bullets that you see in our screen. First of all, we talked last time together about enhanced curriculum. And again, under the leadership of John Voss, we're creating new courses on action civics and ethnic studies so that we make sure that we're responsive to the social and racial equity work that we have in front of us as a district. We've also, again, under John's leadership, created new methods for students, for our staff to engage in professional development, and created flexible opportunities for them to receive some of the back to school professional learning at various times throughout the month of August. And so they had more flexible opportunity in what otherwise would be a full week of professional learning. We have a leadership team that's working together currently to better define and to lay out the way in which our educational assistants and others can serve as tutors and mentors for our students. We recognize that we have work in front of us, but we've made progress on better defining the roles that educational assistants and others can play to support the mental health well-being of our students, the academic needs of our students, and the various other duties that we have across our district that we'll need to be able to support in this model of education, including childcare and transportation. Again, under the leadership of Tanya Allen, that our mental health check-ins, we are in the process of developing a universal SEL mental health screener for all of our students in those first few weeks of school. By doing so, we will be able to, one, understand the kinds of supports that we'll provide to our students and families. And by disaggregating that data by race, we'll be better able to understand the disparities that our students are facing as a result of the pandemic. Tanya's leadership has also provided us not just with new ways to think about family engagement with virtual town halls, but also the way that we can connect with families and provide educational support for how they can work with their students at home during connected learning. And our thinking behind this is not just that we would point them to another YouTube video or perhaps Khan Academy, but really do this within the context of the students that we serve in 287. And as Sandy mentioned, that we're in the process, our leaders are in the process of working to make sure that we have new IEPs for all of our students in special education. On the bottom left-hand part of your screen, I want to also just draw your attention to the Your Choice icon. And we know that by executive order that our families and students have the opportunity to stay in a distance format if they choose to. And we've been analyzing some data and doing some really on the ground kind of work to understand where our families are at in regards to making that choice. And we can come back to more specific data, but right now, roughly, we've been able to contact just over half of our families with students in K-5 in our district, and roughly about half of those families are preferring to stay in distance learning, even if we are offering a hybrid approach. I want to come back to the top part of this document. Our proposal is that students will start the year in step 0, which is connected learning. Part of which we're calling connected learning because we're really trying to emphasize that what we know about the social connection between students and families and our staff is so important that we want to make sure that there's every opportunity for that to happen. In fact, earlier this week at a leadership meeting, we worked with our building leaders to discuss plans for how we can ensure that each of our students and families have an opportunity to meet in person with teachers and staff members at the start of the school year. As Sandy mentioned, we've moved our date from the middle of October to September 28th for the first opportunity that we would move to a hybrid approach. When we do move to a hybrid approach in steps 1 through 3, with 2 days of in-person learning, the other 3 are in our connected learning model. And again, with Friday being a day that we will designate for our buildings to be more deeply cleaned, although we would also, of course, be doing cleaning Tuesday after students and staff are dismissed into the evening and early on Wednesday to make sure that we were doing disinfecting between those 2 groups of students. I mentioned the next part that you see there in terms of the steps 2 through 3 being phased in based on additional grades until we reach that capacity that we've identified in each of the steps. So I want to move to the last part on the left-hand part of your screen, and And these are really the metrics that I referenced last time that we were together. How will we know when it's time to move from one step to another? And if we're moving down from one step to an earlier step, or really from a step to connected learning, most likely that's going to happen very quickly. That we'll become aware of a case or cases and make a determination about what needs to be closed by classroom or by program or by school or perhaps by district pretty responsively. But when we move from step one to step two or to step three, of course, taking into consideration the COVID-19 cases from Hennepin County, as disaggregated as we can have the data, as Sandy demonstrated earlier, that'll be one factor of our metrics for how we would move from one step to another. One of the values of this slow, methodical, phased-in approach is that we can learn about what's working for our unique students and in our unique context here in 287. And that'll be part of our consideration for how we would move from one step to the next. We've made a priority of making sure that we have input both from surveys of our staff, of our families, our students, our back to school planning committee, and really lots of other informal kinds of feedback. But we'll make sure that when we make the move from one step to the next, that we'll continue to have stakeholder input as part of that process. And as you heard earlier from Sandy, that member district is very important to us, and their feedback and input will of course also be part of the determination in moving one step to the next. Two additional notes here, and then I will open it up for questions. Our itinerant program, students who receive itinerant services through 287 will follow the learning model for their home district. And our students who are in our care and treatment programs will follow a learning model that's decided upon in collaboration with our partners. In summary, what I want to emphasize is that we've spent the last several weeks to improve, expand, and really think deeply about what connected learning is and what that means for our students, our families, and how we can best serve them. We think we have a great plan that's laid out in these first few weeks to understand the social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs of our students. And that'll help us inform how we can best make sure that we're serving them as we enter into the school year. One thing that I didn't mention earlier that I'm realizing, and I want to make sure I do here, is that part of that early couple weeks of assessment and understanding where our students are at, we're working to develop a rating rubric to understand the kind of progress our students in special education made in the spring or didn't make last spring. And that rating rubric that under the leadership of Melissa Broding, we'll have in place and ready to be able to understand what kind of needs our students have, and again, whether or not they made progress last spring, and what that means for us as educators in terms of responding to them as we enter into this school year. With that, I'll maybe ask Sandy if there's anything that I missed in that presentation and sharing of our overview and update to our plan, and then maybe move to questions.
Sandy, you're on mute.
Great. Thank you, Ben. I'm sure we'll get some more questions here. Maybe what I can do is make a final statement that our instructions from MDE was to start with those rates and use that as a base, and then take other considerations into the plan, and to consult with health experts about our plan and our district. And so we feel that we followed that advice, that directive, if you will, from the state. And I think I mentioned before, I talked to 4 different health experts, 3 from the Minnesota Department of Health and 1 from Hennepin County Health Department, to add to the decision point of creating this model. And so taking the racial kind of differences into effect, we felt that our district population and our staff population comprises a disproportionately high, represents high communities of color, which have a higher transmission rate and higher impact on their health. You could argue, and some of our member districts did, and I totally agree that that the civil rights and the importance of kids with disabilities getting back in school is critical. It's true. I don't want to reduce this, that our kids with disabilities may have suffered the most. So there is that factor. And then there's the factor of racial equity or inequity that we also took into consideration. And when we combine that with the challenges of just being ready for our students and ready for what comes next in this health scenario, we felt this was the prudent plan to propose. We modified it. The health experts agreed that it was a prudent plan. And in fact, the question I asked Susan Clammer twice was, am I being too conservative, too careful with this plan? And she repeated both times, I think this is a prudent plan. And in fact, she said if she were a parent, she would find this plan to be a very appropriate plan. We know that there's differences of opinions about that. We know that our member districts are front and center to the work we do as an intermediate. So what we did is try to balance all that together and bring it to you for your questions, concerns, and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have some raised hands. Andrea Keen, if you could begin, please.
Thanks, Regina. Ben, thank you for the presentation. It's obvious to see how much work has been done just since our last regular meeting. Thanks for all the great information. I apologize if you shared this and I missed it when I was moving locations, but does 287 have kind of a cutoff date for families to decide when they would choose to do 100% distance learning? Or would that be something that would be done later on as the hybrid starts adding kids back to school? That's when you would find out who's choosing to stay home full time? Does that question make sense?
I think so, and I'll do my best to answer it. But for this question and for all future questions, I would welcome my colleagues to jump in here as well. But we did have this conversation, and I know that some districts have asked families to make a commitment to distance learning or their, whatever they're calling it, for a full year. When we had that conversation, we felt that it was important that we were really as responsive to our students and families as what we felt like we possibly could be. So our conversations, and I don't know that we're completely final here yet, is that we would only be asking for commitments for approximately 2 weeks for our families, because we really wanted them to have the opportunity to say what was working best for them, and we didn't find a lot of value in asking for a commitment for a long period of time. That we felt that we wanted to be responsive. We felt that we could be responsive with our staff. So that's where we currently sit.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I could just add to that, the 2-week period actually was picked because that's typically what transportation wants to change routes or start routes or end routes. So that was the reason we picked the 2 weeks.
Thank you. Our next question is from Crystal Brecky. Crystal, go ahead.
I wasn't expecting to be up so soon. Thank you. I have a couple of buckets of questions and comments, so I'll kind of take them one at a time. Otherwise, I feel like it might be too overwhelming. Before I share the first one, I just want to publicly say that the changes that have been made in the last week, I think, are what the district that I represent wanted and needed to hear to feel supportive of the plan. And so I just think that it's important to say that and to give this district credit for the responsiveness in responding to those concerns. And so everything that I'm going to say hopefully will fall underneath that headline, that Richfield supports this plan in large part because of the way in which some of the concerns that have been voiced were addressed. So wanted to start there. I think that the first bucket is probably related to my own just struggle to understand the differences between, I can't remember already, if it level or phase 1 through 3, and what it actually means for kids in terms of that phased in approach of who is actually in person. I don't know if there's a way that you could potentially describe it in terms of the lived experience of a student, or if you can say more about how grades are being phased in. I think the reason I'm wondering is if it means that actually there are some grades that might have 0 in-person option until we get to phase 3, which to me seems like a potentially inequitable way to approach that.
Sure. I think to start, one of the clarifications that we did recently was to just explicitly say that step 1 is for our kindergarten through 5th grade students. And so that would be step 1, is that we would welcome those students back in that step. And after we've accounted for families who've opted to remain in connected learning, who want to stay in a distance model, then we would make determinations. So if we are in step 1 and we're serving K-5 students, and that ends up being in the, and I'm just choosing a number here because we don't have these hard numbers quite yet, but that's 18% of our students, then we would look at our next levels of grade bands and take our numbers of students from each of those grade levels, starting from 6th grade and working our way up until in step 2, we got to 50%. And then step 3, we got to 100%. So we would just work our way through the grade bands and welcome them back until we reach the thresholds that we have stated in our steps.
Can you share more about the rationale for doing it in that way? Just because I'll say, for me, it makes me concerned that our ALC students, for example, might not have any opportunity for in-person learning until the very end of phased in work. And let's be honest, that might not happen at all this school year. And so I think that's where my concern is coming from.
I can maybe start, and then Sandy, I'll invite you to jump in here as well. But really, this goes back to our methodical kind of lessons learned approach, and being really deliberate about understanding what's working for our students and what's not working for our students. And one of the things that we thought about really early on is what would this look like if we had large numbers of students back in our building early on, and there were lots of scenarios and situations that we couldn't account for and couldn't possibly plan for, or really ensure that we were creating a safe environment for our students and for our staff. And so our steps are really built on being able to welcome back students in phases gradually, and so that we can ensure that we can provide a safe learning environment for them while they're here. Definitely understand your concern that getting to 100% into step 3, that might be a while, and we just don't know where this pandemic is going to go. A second point that I would make, and then I'll ask Sandy to jump in with, again, anything that I've missed here, is that one of the reasons that we chose this real stepped, phased in kind of approach is that we could turn the dial faster if we chose to, but we didn't need to. That we created a model that would allow us to be able to take gradual steps forward if that was the right thing to do. But we could also turn the dial faster if we felt like the metrics were showing us that was the right thing to do based on the metrics that I referenced earlier. If we hadn't built the model this way, then we wouldn't have the steps kind of laid out in the way that we could be able to turn the dial slowly. And so this way, it's really going to allow us to do both. We can go slowly, but we could also move faster if we thought that was the right thing to do based on the metrics. Sandy?
Yeah, I'll add, and then maybe I can ask Tanya to just speak to, having just been a principal of an ALC, what that might look like as we go through these phases. But a couple of points that come to mind that might be helpful is I've learned that people have been changing the names. Some districts are steps, some districts are different names as you go along. And to be candid, we learned that if you say distance learning, it has a really bad connotation, and we understand that. Parents were not pleased with either the quality or the quantity of help that they received last spring. And so again, we have and are continuing to work on a much more robust form of that connected learning. So you could conceivably see ALC kids coming in to see a therapist, ALC kids coming in to meet their teacher one-to-one. We've even talked about having canopies outside, so we could do that in an outdoor arena if possible. So again, and others can add to this, we hope that distance learning will be more satisfying, more adequate, and more result in better progress for our kids this year, no matter what stage we're in. But I think I have seen districts describe a plan that we're doing as hybrid with a start in distance. And that would be another way we could describe this. We described it in steps and explained it the way we did. But it relates to what happens, and that may be different in district, but the district and name by name is what I've learned. But our hope is that we do a better job as in both areas, and that we can move as fast as we can. We'd love nothing better than for those transmission rates to start going the other direction, and us to be able to move that, as using the analogy of a dial, even more quickly. I know our staff would. They want to be with kids. They want to see what's going on, but they want our staff really. We're emphatic that they want it to be a safe environment as well. So that is a concern, and I hope we can move fast enough to get those kids in a more rapid way than a slower way. Tanya, do you want to maybe just give a little bit of input about ALCs, what you would imagine?
Sure. So thank you, Superintendent Lewandowski. The one thing I would say about our ALC students that we learned from the spring being at NEC is the biggest thing was the need for flexibility, because many of our ALC students, as you looked at those homeless and highly mobile numbers earlier, quite a few of them are falling under that category. And so when you talk about them and their needs, with many of them had to work a job. So actually distance learning or connected learning will help them, because a lot of them are juggling that responsibility to be in their homes. We also have, many of them are the older siblings. So even if they're not working, they are the older sibling at home with their siblings that may be in a district doing some type of e-learning at home or hybrid. And then those days that they're not at the school, they're kind of the caregivers often. And we also at NEC, for example, we have those students that are parents themselves. And so that's about 15 to 20 people who were not very, when everything started happening in March, trust me, I'd hear from them because they weren't comfortable with staff even appearing to seem like, they were not okay, just because of fear about, spreading it to their child. And so just from a thinking of having your child in our daycare at the building, that was a big concern as well. So I think that the key with our ALC students is being connected and making sure we don't lose that connection to staff and meeting their needs, because their individual needs are so different from student to student. But as Sandy mentioned, the opportunity to be able to connect with mental health providers and our social work staff and others will really be what the difference will be for those students.
Thank you, Tanya. And maybe just one more thing, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Crystal.
I was just going to try to move along because I feel like this is going to take hours. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, in a building like NEC, we're going to have around 275 to 300 students, both who are setting for special education and area learning center students. And there are a lot of variables with those almost 300 students that you have to take into account and carefully and slowly put back together again to do it safely, both emotionally as well as from a health standpoint.
I will try to be brief with my second bucket and do not need answers in response. It just feels really important for me personally to say out loud, which is that I agree with and fully support what has already been shared about the racial equity lens that is being used. And I think it's incomplete to not talk about what we did hear from families in the survey that we got, which is real concern. And you touched on it, that distance learning was not necessarily successful or did not meet their needs. And so it makes me anxious that we're talking about racial equity so much without really being rooted in the voices of our families of color. And I just feel like that needs to be something that we continue to stay centered on, even as we're talking about public health data and what various experts are saying. I think it's dangerous when we try to assume that we know what's best for families without listening to what they have actually directly told us already. So I felt like that was important to share, even as we're having this conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Crystal, and thank you for giving us an opening. I'm going to ask Tanya to talk about that process because I think her leadership contributed to us getting input from parents that we really candidly haven't gotten in past years, and I'll let her explain how that happened.
Hello, everyone. This is really a short. I did do a slide deck just because I think the visual of it will tell it all. So I will just try to quick show you this. So what we did was we surveyed really quickly, and a shout out to Radius, Rachel Hicks, and also Amy Wold, who helped call. We took on calling 76 families with interpreters for some of our families, and we didn't reach them all, but we got about a 53% response rate as we just started early on Monday. So we called those that are enrolled at NEC or SEC because that's where our elementary students are. And parents were provided an overview of connected learning. And then we posed the question. And we did it by phone versus survey because often our surveys data represents our white families and not our BIPOC families. And all but one family shared a definitive response. So when you look at the racial demographics, sorry, I could have gone to present mode there. When you look at the racial demographics for those that chose connected learning, you'll see that it's 19 families, so it's not as big of a sample size, but 19 families. And those that chose it overwhelmingly, 42, you can see overwhelmingly, it's primarily our BIPOC families. And then when you transition and look at that, so that's 19 between North and South, 20 between North and South chose the hybrid option. And you can see the exact opposite racial demographic data, where the overwhelming majority are our white families that are choosing the hybrid option comparatively. And then when we looked at it by district, just to give a snapshot, you could see, and like I said, we didn't get to reach all, I wanted 100%, but it just didn't happen. But you can see where the breakdown was for districts by whether they wanted connected, hybrid, or either. And I won't go into the stories that we received during that time because I wouldn't want to identify any family because our sample size is so small. But what I would say is that families expressed a lot of things that they shared over the phone about personal situations related to COVID during those phone calls. And our families of color were much more concerned about returning into a building than others. They were even some of the ones that chose hybrid admitted that this is what they're going to say today. When we actually say, here's September 8th, they don't know that they will be in that same place because they're also looking at that information. And they also acknowledged openly the disproportionality that they're seeing in their own community and the concerns they have about their children returning to our school, because they know that our children, unlike children at another child maybe in their household, they know that their children, when they're coming into our setting, there's much more risk for exposure because some of our students are spitters, biters, other things that happen. They're concerned about that, as well as concerned about their child being able to keep on a mask all day. So those are some of the things that happen with just that small group. I wish I could have got to 100% for you, but that's kind of where we're sitting. So just to kind of address your question about what does it look like from a racial equity perspective, the numbers were opposite in terms of who chose what. And we can't extrapolate 100% that's going to replicate with that remaining number of families. But if it is replicated, we're talking about being able to break down to really small groups and numbers overall.
Thank you. That's helpful just because it's more recent information. And like you said, it's changing day by day and week by week. And the last that I was looking at was, I think, what was shared at our last board meeting from the survey, where I think, over 50% of families of color specifically said they were concerned or extremely concerned about distance learning. So I appreciate the additional insights and the fact that we are all adjusting all of the time in terms of the reality and the really tough choices that are in front of our families in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya and Crystal. I just want to do a check-in with Radius. Do you want to add anything, Radius?
No, I'm telling you, it was a really good experience for all of us to really be able to engage our families and find out from them what's going on. And ultimately, it's nice for us to be able to keep a racial equity lens in the work that we are doing and constantly, consistently ask the question, what will be the unintended consequences of the decisions that we are making? Are we making sure that we're reaching out to those families that ultimately the marginalized ones, and we really want to find out from them what they think about what's going on. So it's not just those of us that are sitting around the table who may look alike answering those kinds of questions, but we're literally reaching out to as many of our families as we can so that we can make a very, more comprehensive decision. So this has been a great experience for all of us. And it was nice to be able to work with Tanya and Rachel to facilitate this for you.
Thank you, Radius. And you might enjoy that some parents commented they really liked a personal call, which really doesn't happen very frequently anymore. So thank you. Is that it, Crystal? Okay.
Okay, but next we will hear from Ann Casey. Ann, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Regina. I actually have a friend who received one of those calls and very much appreciated it. And she said, is her name really Radius? And I said, yeah, it's really Radius. So thank you very much, Radius. I'm glad that we're still on this topic, because my question is on this topic. And it is, we're talking a lot about, and all of our districts are saying, we want to get kids back in the classroom. We want to get kids back in the classroom. And now what I'm hearing from Tanya and seeing from the survey data is a lot of families who are very concerned about getting their kids back in classrooms and would prefer to keep them in a distance learning model. And we're required to offer that by the governor's order. And it is indeed in the governor's order required to be equitable. So I have a worry that by setting up an in-person model as kind of the ideal, that is making our distance learning model, which we have lots of families who are going to choose for lots of different reasons, fundamentally the lesser model. And so I guess, what are we doing to keep those equitable, and how over time, because we're going to be in both and we're going to have kids in both, even when we're doing hybrid, we're going to have kids in both. How are we going to measure our success at keeping those equitable?
Sandy, you are on mute.
Tanya or Radius, do you want to answer that? Otherwise, I'll take a try.
I can work to try and take a try, and then someone else can jump in. I would say the one thing that I, because I called North Education Center families and obviously just stepped out of the principal role, we had some really good conversations, and the virtual town halls gave us some really good information. And one of the biggest things that we're doing is we have developed an introduction to family engagement training that we're doing with leaders in the district, and really talking in depth about how are we being responsive to the needs of our families. And so our whole approach is really different than what it was in the past, in terms of making sure that we're being really explicit about what are we, for example, I'll just give you an example. For those that are in connected learning and those that, you know, we're delivering materials to their homes, making sure that we stop and take a moment to think, what are we actually sending to the homes? Do we talk to the families about the materials that we're preparing to send? Are the materials culturally responsive and appropriate? Do the materials, you know, do the parents know how to use the materials that we're sending, whether it's paper things or whether it's electronic? And so Rachel, once again, I'm going to shout out to Rachel, developed this video cast called Family Vibes that we'll be debuting, that's really specific, but we'll be leveraging people from all the sites throughout the district, some of our staff that speak another language, that can really give short videos. So not those long videos that we've all watched and thought, could you have gotten to the point? Those really short, you know, 5 to 7 minute videos for families, so that they can understand what are some of the things that we're looking at. And obviously I would say I'm going to defer to more teaching and learning to talk about the assessment features and what that's going to look like. But I think one of the biggest things is we're having very intentional conversations throughout this week. We had conversations with principals and their administrative teams about what does that look like to really have deeper conversations about engaging families and removing fear, and having just direct, honest conversations about what you're sending as a teacher, and does that make sense for that student? Because I can't copy what I'm going to give to Ann versus what I'm going to give to Radius versus anyone else. I need to make sure that I understand what your needs are. I understand what the next family's needs are. I understand the best way to communicate with that family. So we're reviewing and revamping questionnaires and things like that, and really almost kind of creating an approach where week by week, there's weekly check-ins with families, a parent, not I'm just going to leave a voicemail and then not circle back, but I'm going to keep calling till I reach them. I'm going to text them. I'm going to, you know, just to make sure that we're not getting into that pattern that we can all get into. So I think that's a big change from what I would say we were doing last year. I think we're just being very, very much more intentional. And we're also going to do that with mental health staff. So everyone's getting regular mental health check-ins. We're not going to go for a week and not know what's going on with the kid. We're going to leverage all the information that we have available to get to those families and those students. So that's one thing that I would say is just the approach and how we're doing it is different than what we were doing in the spring.
And I would just add one more example is, because I was on one of the town halls that Tanya ran, and a theme I heard in there, and I suspect it came up in other feedback from parents, was we don't know how to teach the things you want us to teach, right? And we've been referring to that, but I heard we need a tutor to do this. So we are trying to gear up some of our educational assistants with additional PD that would help them be a better tutor, so that the teacher may or may not be on the lesson with them, but the educational assistant would be available to either tutor in a certain subject and or just be that social emotional connection. We know that we have a lot of kids with varied needs. We also have a great group of educational assistants who could do a tremendous job with that. And especially if we gave them some more professional development, we could maximize that instructional time in a way I think parents were yearning for. And then maybe I can just mention one more. Yeah, maybe I could just mention one more thing in terms of unintended consequences. What keeps me up at night, and why I think this plan might be the best for our particular population of students, is an unintended consequence would be that if a student with severe autism comes into the building and sees their preferred staff in PPE and absolutely can't handle that kind of change, that would be very, very destabilizing for that student. And if you get a number of students destabilized at the same time, things can go awry very quickly. So that's one example of an unintended consequence that led us to be a caution in how we approach this. I think the other thing, and I'm just going to be very candid, you know, and you saw the statistics on the disproportionate health outcomes of COVID with our communities of color. So the unintended consequence I wouldn't want would be to start too quickly and have a transmission that was widespread and more and impacted our communities of color in a way that is twice of the impact of our white communities. So that's a significant unintended consequence that I want to be cautious about until we feel confident that we can do this in the way that we're being told to do it.
And does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you. And
No.
there are no other raised hands that I see on the raised hand feature. Is there anyone else who has questions or comments before we continue with the presentation? So Sandy, I would invite you to just carry on with the rest of the presentation that we have.
I think you've had it. Ben, are you finished?
We're good.
Yeah, we're good. I think we intended to bring you up to speed, show you the modifications, try to answer your questions. We know this is not a perfect solution. I don't know if any of your districts have a perfect solution, but this one is not perfect. There are just too many variables, but we accept that you may or may not, our districts may or may not approve this. Just like your communities gave you feedback and led you to approve what you have approved for those districts. But it is our best recommendation, and we invite the board to either have more questions, comments, or I'll turn it back to the chair for her consideration.
Thank you, Sandy. So I do want to have this opportunity for one last round of questions or comments before we move this to resolution vote. Are there any other additional questions or comments? I'm
Regina, this is Andrea Keene.
Andrea, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did just want to make a comment before we move into the vote. And I just wanted to state that Wayzata Public Schools is not going to be supporting the learning plan. But Sandy, I want to thank you and your team for the thoughtfulness and the hard work that I know went into all of this planning. I want to thank you also for listening to member districts and for being responsive, as was noted by Crystal. And despite my vote, I hope that you know that I will continue to support 287 students as best as I can as we move through this process.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I am going to continue perhaps just asking each representative of our member districts for a once around the table, just to give your own indication on your action this evening. But if I could start with Steve Adams from Hopkins.
Sure. I'll be supporting this. As I think I mentioned, some of our parents have expressed concern about not starting this soon enough, the hybrid model soon enough. But it was interesting to see the results of the poll that our Black parents, at least, are pretty evenly split on, connected learning versus in-person learning. But I think we would agree that the ideal situation for all of our students in 287 is in person. They're high touch, high need, and I would like to get to that as soon as possible.
Thank
But
you.
I will be supporting the
Thank you. Crystal Brackey from Richfield.
Yeah, so as I shared at the very beginning of my long comment, sorry you all, I and Richfield will support this in large part because of the changes that were made. I think there are still some concerns and hesitations in terms of there being no in-person option available for families who feel like they want or need it for a wide variety of reasons. I understand why 287 has made the series of decisions that it has, however, and respect it. I think the other thing that I'll just put in a personal plug, I hope can potentially just continue to be reconsidered, is that phased in approach by grade, and potentially thinking about how to take a more differentiated approach that is not so strictly based by grade alone.
Thank you, Crystal. Ann Casey from St. Louis Park.
Thanks. I'm going to be supporting this resolution tonight. I feel very confident saying that St. Louis Park supports it, as it's very similar to our own plan that we passed on Monday. I also, as I mentioned earlier, have some concerns, and those are not for 287 at all. They're for all of our districts in ensuring that we can provide an equitable distance learning environment for our students who choose distance learning for a variety of reasons. And many of the students who are going to be choosing distance learning in all of our districts are some of our highest risk students, highest need students. And I think that giving ourselves, our staff, that chance to have a fighting chance at that distance learning, which all of our kids are going to be in for the majority of their time anyway, is really, I think you used the word prudent, Sandy, several times, and I think it's extremely prudent. So I am in support, and I really want to thank all of you, the staff, for all of the hard work, and just acknowledge too for the staff and for all of the board members. And I know those of us who are voting in our own districts in these last week or this week, this is an unbelievably impossible situation and decision to have to make. There is no good answer. There is no good feeling that comes out of being on one side or of this or the other. It is just trying to balance as best we can, knowing our kids and knowing our communities. So I just want to acknowledge that to everybody, that this is tough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. And Andrea, is there anything you'd like to add to your comment? I
Nothing.
appreciate you leading us off. Okay, thank you. Ruthie Dallas from Brooklyn Center.
Hi. As I reported earlier, what our decision was, I'll be supporting 287 plan. I think it coincides a lot with our online learning, starting the students out. We have allotted for students to come on campus for special needs or special consideration. And the parents will have the opportunity to, toward the end of the month, to opt in or out. If we hear more from the parents, then, there could be the opportunity to change the plan again. But right now, I support the plan, the 287.
Thank you, Ruthie. Next, Michelle Coons from Orono.
Here we go. Yes, so can you hear me? Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, after not really having had the opportunity to talk this over with my people at Orono, I will wear my 287 hat this evening and vote resoundingly yes, and thanks to everyone who's done such fabulous work. And we will see what happens. And I know 287 will respond as things change. So I'm confident we've got the best that we can have for the moment. And I really am super glad that we are taking the question of racial equity very seriously in everything we do, as we've been doing for a long time now. So I will be voting for the changes.
Thank you, Michelle. Heidi Marty from West Tonka.
Yes, hi. I will be supporting 287's resolution. It's close to what West Tonka is doing. Our district is very different in its racial makeup. So taking that into account, I understand the measures and the thought and that has been put into a very prudent and slow start. And I very much appreciate the in step 0, Ben's describing of the connected learning, all of what sounds to me like there's going to be a lot of effort put into connecting with families during however long this is going to last. I feel very good about the amount of effort and thought that's been put into the improvements in the connected learning. So thank you to all the staff for your very diligent approach to creating this plan, and I will be supporting it.
Thank you, Heidi. Next up, Regina Neville from Medina, myself. And I too want to echo all of the gratitude for the consideration and the detail on racial equity, on health, on access to education for this plan. However, my district superintendent and special education director have asked that I vote no, and I do need to honor that. So I do want to make that known before we go forward. Sam Sant from Robbinsdale.
I will be voting yes on this plan. Although Robbinsdale is going to 100% distance learning in the fall, with discussing with our teachers union and getting lots of surveys back and feedback from families, we felt that was the best decision to make with Robbinsdale. I think based on 287 and the type of children that are being taught, that are high-level trauma 1 students that need that additional one-on-one support, to do 100% distance learning would not, be probable, especially for long periods of time. So I support this model, and going forward, to be able to work in using PPE and being able to work with these students one-on-one. They're already in small group settings, being a part of 287. I think this is the right decision to make based on the amount of cases that we do have in Hennepin County. It's still early to tell, things could still change, but I do support the administration with what they're doing. And if need be, they would make changes to that.
Thank you, Sam. And Adam Seidel from Eden Prairie.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the model as well, and I very strongly, I would add, and I say that, even though that I am a very strong advocate for having as many students as possible back in the buildings as often as possible and as soon as possible. We have our kindergartners and first graders going back full time in a socially distanced setting in Eden Prairie, and we're hopeful we can get all the elementary students back in full time as soon as possible. I think that's very important, for any type of student. And at the end of the day, if we've been building a distance learning academy for years now in Eden Prairie, actually, but if that was the right model for both students, more people would be doing it. If 2 days a week were as good as 5 days a week, we would go to school 2 days a week. That would be certainly a lot easier. It's just not. But I want to acknowledge, and that's sort of even though all of that, I support this so strongly, because even in Eden Prairie, where we were looking, and I'm sure this is the case in all of your home districts, where we spend so much time looking at our regional numbers within the county and our local community numbers. And that was one piece of data, but there's the complication that many of our staff and 20% of our students don't come from Eden Prairie. They come from surrounding counties. They don't even come from the south part of the region. And the additional challenges of that just in our district are so compounded in this district. And so to try and pick a spot with the moving numbers driven by the virus and trends moving in different ways in different regions is essentially an impossible task. So I don't see any other alternative than the prudent and cautious plan put forward tonight, just for everyone's safety.
Thank you very much. With that, Superintendent Lewandowski, are there any final comments that you'd like to make before I call for a motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for your comments and feedback. No matter what the board votes, if the chair decides to ask for a motion, I want you to know that any district that is currently not able to vote yes, we will go back to your districts. We'll talk to your leaders. We'll do everything we can to find the right intersection with what they need to the best of our abilities. So that's what intermediates do, and I want to commit to those districts who may not yet be in favor of this plan. But thank you very much for your thoughtfulness.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. And thank you everyone for your thoughtful comments and questions this evening. This decision is worth all of the time that is being taken. At this time, I would like to ask for a motion for this resolution vote to approve the recommendation of District 287 as presented.
So moved.
We have several. Did I hear Crystal as one of those?
You did.
Keen, I second.
Okay, so Crystal Brackey as the motion, Andrea Keen as the second. Thank you. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Adams.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keen.
No.
Dallas.
Yes.
Coons.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
No.
Sam.
Yes.
Seidel.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries. Thank you all for your work. Next up on the agenda, we have the first reading of policy regarding masks in our buildings. And
Madam Chair,
yes,
just for point of clarification, maybe you did this, but we need to approve the resolution. I'm not sure that.
oh, separately, and I did not introduce that correctly. So adoption of the resolution.
I thought that's what we just did, was it not?
That was what my intention was. That was my intention, but is there a second vote that is needed? I was aware of this single resolution that was needed.
Right, as long as the vote was on to approve the resolution and it was a roll call vote, then that's all we need.
Thank you. My intention was that I used the language resolution, but if I did not, that would have been my error. But I think I used the language that we would approve the resolution as presented.
Okay, very
But
good.
thank you for double checking, because that it could have been missed. So our next item is to take a look at the first read for the policy presentation regarding masks. And Ann Becker, may I ask you to give a little background, please?
Yes, I'm just catching up to you. There we are.
Certainly.
Good evening, Madam Chair and board members. I am presenting the first read of the face covering policy. This model policy came out from MSBA very recently. And for the most part, we have adopted their recommended policy. We do have more stringent rules about wearing masks when you're alone in your office or your classroom, because our health and safety manager has determined that not wearing your mask in an enclosed space results in lots of droplets floating around in the air. And so even though you're alone in there, you certainly could be joined by someone else. And so the best practice is to keep your mask on even when working alone in a space. So both face covering and social distancing is strongly encouraged and in some cases required in this policy.
Thank you for that introduction. This is a first read, but are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to address at this time? Adam.
I'm just wondering if there is or in your mind, and it's a little bit nebulous in the language, a blink off provision in this policy. I would just hate to see if we get into a situation in a number of months where the executive order is rescinded or things change and people are no longer required to wear masks and everyone's sort of delighted, but then we have to wait 10 days and have kind of an odd policy on the books that we're enforcing. Is there any consideration for a situation like that down the road?
My hope is that because this cites to the executive orders that require wearing a mask, and that this policy is designed to comply with those orders, that if they were to be rescinded, that we would have a reason to say that this policy does not apply. Certainly, we'd want to get it off the books as soon as possible, as you indicated, but I think we'd have an out in that regard.
Does that answer your question, Adam?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Crystal Brecky.
Yeah, my question is just around timing, because I know this is the first read of this, and as we just approved, we're not planning to go into phase 1 until the end of September. So theoretically, we have time to do an additional read and approve at a future meeting. But my question is about the one-on-one contact that we are talking about happening between now and the end of September, and whether this policy needs to be in place by a certain point in time in order for that one-on-one work to proceed with clear and consistent expectations.
That's a very good question. Ideally, the face covering policy would be voted on tonight as an emergency policy and adopted, so that when we have staff coming back into our buildings, it's already in place. That said, we didn't ask for that because the executive order sort of takes care of that in a sense, and you'll be voting on a second read on August 27th. And so we felt that between those two variables, that was acceptable.
Great, thank you.
That's good question and helpful clarification. Any additional questions or comments that could be taken into consideration before this returns for a vote at the end of the month? All right, Anne, thank you so much. There's a lot of responsiveness with everything that is moving so quickly. That concludes our action items in terms of what we have before us this evening. Are there any other items that anyone would like to bring before the board this evening? Not seeing any waving hands. Okay. With that, I would like to thank everyone once again. Want to thank all of our member districts, because I know that everyone is taking this seriously. We will continue to work forward and modify as needed. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, I move we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Steve. And the second, did that come from Adam?
Yes.
Thank you. Seconded by Adam. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Adams.
Aye.
Brackey is an aye. Casey.
Aye.
Keen.
Yes.
Dallas.
Yes.
Kuntz.
Aye.
Marty.
Aye.
Neville.
Aye.
Sant.
Yes.
Seidel.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. And with that, we are adjourned. Please be well and take care, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.